Hey everyone, I'm Mike Henry, and this is my Procreate demo for the piece I call SideEye. So similar to my previous video, this piece actually sat around for a really long time. In fact, it sat around for even longer. This one represents like another attempt at trying to get out of a artist block of some sort, and I've been really productive lately, and so a lot of these kind of came really quickly. So let's take a look at the development of this one and how I dug out of it. Something that I discussed in the last piece was the idea of just playing with shapes and the fact that these types of illustrations are just done for fun and that there's really no goal here. And that's exactly what happened. You can see here the type of pencil that I'm using. I just grabbed some random chalk. I was just kind of playing around, and really it was just like, let's see where this goes. Very quickly, I had a profile that I really enjoyed, and so I just kept refining it a little bit further. You can see here I'm using the same chalk. I don't remember what it was. It's kind of irrelevant. It's really just about finding something that was like messy and imprecise, so I could just like go in here and not really overthink refining it, but just bring a little bit more detail than what I had in that original rough sketch. Depending on what I know the final piece will look like, I will have either tighter or looser lines. You can see here the fact that it's very loose, and I actually don't take it much further than this. That means that I'm going to move into something that's a little bit more rendered, where the lines aren't important, they're just kind of there as a guide. However, I do not end up completing that particular look. Here you can see I have her like holding this little locket as this rough continues. You'll see, there you go, it just got kind of like noodled in there. In the final, I do end up losing that because I just didn't really feel like whatever story that wasn't valuable to me. But at this point, you can see I'm still working this original version of it. So I'm starting the flat process. Here I'm using just a regular round brush, and I'm just blocking it in super quickly. I don't know exactly where I thought I was going to go with this. You can see I start to render it with like an airbrush, but I quickly abandon this and rethink the entire tack of this piece. So as the flatting is going in, eventually you're going to start seeing the rendering happening. The method that I was originally going to go with was I was going to paint kind of like an ambient occlusion pass and then go in and start doing harder shadows as a series of layers. I do ultimately abandon that, but you'll see that get carried out here. Something that does remain from this to the final is kind of like the general palette, although I do change her top to more of like a neon green. Otherwise, it's all the same. You can see there I was just playing with some sort of a bloom for a second. Here I was throwing in the locket, and then this is where I quickly tested the shadow color just to see if that was going to give me something that I liked. Here I very quickly realized I forgot the fingernail, so I throw the fingernail in. I refine the hand a little bit more, give it a little bit more definition and make it more what I would like it to be. And then I continue with the ambient occlusion pass. This is done using the select paint, select clear method that I usually use. That is linked down below in a video where I explain it in a more detailed video, as opposed to explaining it here for those who've seen it a bunch of times. But you can see here I'm starting to paint in the ambient occlusion layer, and I gotta say, at this point I already kind of like wasn't feeling this, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna keep working it and see where it goes. But ultimately I just didn't like how it was progressing. And as we talked about in previous videos, you're always kind of looking for that motivation, that personal motivation to get it done, because there's no job here. This is really just like exploring something. So the only reason for me to continue to work it and finish it is because it's fun, and it kind of wasn't fun. So, since this is the select paint, select clear method, you can see I'm working on her body. The reason why the color is so different is because when I have a bunch of layers that are all the same color and I'm keeping them separate for a reason, I'll lower the opacity of the one that I'm working on just so that I know where one shape ends and the other begins. I also do quite a bit of detailing here on the top, just to start, it's the next layer up, so I work on that a little bit, but all of that ultimately will get abandoned when I pivot the direction that I'm taking this piece. So about this point is when I'm ready to tap out on this piece. Just before I wrap up, I sort of increase the opacity on the lines, and this right here is the way it sat in my Procreate gallery for about a year and a half. I kept kind of coming back to it. It might have even been 2 years, honestly. I kept coming back to it, kind of looking at it, trying to think, what do I want to do with this next? And then ultimately deciding, I don't really feel like rendering this. I'm not going to work on it anymore. But after completing that last piece, I was like, hey, let's use something like that and come back in here and try to tackle this one. Not really like something strict like a series, but just the other one was like a girl from like about the chest up. Let's do the same thing here. So first things first, I nix the hand. I decide that I don't want to go that route. You can see I turn off some of the layers of the locket. Eventually I do turn off the locket. Right now I'm just refining some of my flats and making sure that they are a little bit more pushed, but for the most part, like just kind of making sure that they're as solid as I want them to be. Also adding a little bit of that turpentine brush goodness with that color sort of shifts some things around a little bit. So you can see I'm playing with a lot of color. I'm saying to myself, if I'm going to work on this, let's make sure this palette is what I want it to be. Since I decided to tackle this in a similar style to the last one, I immediately switch over to my rough inking pen and I find a shadow color that I like, and I just start working the piece with that in mind. I still do select paint, select clear, because I am still going to move through everything and try to bring shadows to everything. But you can also see part of the reason why I switched to this method is look how much faster this is going. As far as a Procreate time-lapse is concerned, it's basically just recording like the strokes, which means you get these like little outcomes here and there. You don't really see the actual brush stroke as it gets created. But you can see that already in the time of this video that we've gone from no shadow to shadows. Look how much progress is being made. And then look at like the earlier part of this video, how long it took to kind of get to where it was when I abandoned it. Now, different painting methods, different rendering methods have their positives and negatives, and since this is something that I was struggling to find the interest to keep going on, it being quick was a big enough positive for me to keep working on it. And that motivation ended up increasing as I was going, because you can see here as it's coming more and more together, it allows me as the artist, even if I'm able to kind of like see where I want it to go, this helps me see where it can go, and I start having like a lot of fun, and I see it as a valuable thing to complete. So I'm thinking about these shadows in a sort of cel-shaded style, at least in terms of the fact that they are stepped. They are not smoothly rendered from one level to the next, from darkness to lightness. But I'm also trying to think of them in terms of lines and bring both of those two things together. The layer settings for these is it's like a pale tan set to multiply for like the main shadow. But then for this next shadow layer that you see here, it's black, and then it's been adjusted. It's set to overlay, I believe, and then lowered in opacity a little bit. Trying to mess with all these different settings and trying to really like arrive at something where I feel like I'm getting that interplay that I'm looking for between lines and the colors underneath, their shadows, etc., etc. I'm not necessarily looking for something specific. I'm just trying to find something that's like really satisfying as I'm moving through it. And this is kind of where I end up here. You'll see as the piece continues, though, I continue to add more supporting elements, things like outlines, and actually a series of outlines, a dark outline, a light outline, and just trying to play with this mix of these shapes in this dimension, but also using flat elements to really sell like a graphic component. Also, I find that when I'm doing a style like this, less is more. The idea of really like pulling out all the tricks doesn't really have as good a return as it does maybe when I'm doing rendering, where I'm really trying to sell all the materials and I'm really thinking about like, how can I do this and what technique can I use to do that? It's really about boiling things down to simpler techniques, a more basic application to just really try to bring out the most important things that are going to sell the forms. In this case, you can see we've got just a couple of shadow layers, we got line work supporting, and then we've got this highlight layer. I do go in and add a little bit of an embellishment to the highlight, but it's really just like a subtle style thing where I'm adding this saturated rim around it. It's not really like building up the shine so that it's like more and more realistic or more and more elaborate. You can see here I'm throwing an outline now around the entire figure. I then color shifted a couple of different ways, just really trying to seek out what I think this final version is going to be. What do I really need to get what I'm going for? Is it black lines? Is it colored lines? Is it more shadow layers? Is it not? Is it some gradients in the skin, some gradients in the hair? What is the ultimate version of this without it feeling like it's overworked? And so we've also got this color layer on top to bring a little bit of harmony, but also just to bring like a little bit of a different vibe. The rest of this is just kind of bringing in the final bits of treatment that are graphic, stylized. It's about pushing the character forward, but bringing some elements in that are at least interesting. So I work with a gradient. Here you can see I start creating all of these lines where I duplicate them and then turn them and then set them to like an overlay or something, or a multiply, and just really lower their opacity. And so that way those lines are playing with the gradients that are in the background. You can see here just some final minor tweaks here and there just to bring everything into final harmony. And then here is the conclusion. There's also some chromatic aberration thrown on at the end as well. So this is the final piece. It's not totally fair, but let's just quickly go through the rough sketch where I abandoned it, and then the final for perspective. So here's the rough sketch, and then here's the treatment when I started to paint it, and then I decided it wasn't really going where I wanted it to, so I rescued it with this treatment right here. So I hope you enjoyed this one. If you did, please consider hitting like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.